Hey, welcome to Billy's Books. Today we're going to do The Penultimate Truth by Philip K. Dick. Welcome to Billy's Books. We're going to do the Philip K. Dick's The Penultimate Truth. Classic sci-fi writer, is Philip K. Dick. He's, of course, known for many books and movies that were inspired by the books. I will not list them now. Um, when I found this book, I think I started reading it and I was like, does it sound familiar? I think it's because I read it like 10 or 15 years ago and forgot, but it's vaguely familiar. I don't think there's a movie about it. If there is, then you can correct me. It's one of those, most of his books are written in the 50s and early 60s, Cold War stuff. And most of them have that future, and then what they do is now that we're 50 years and beyond later, we get that sense of the past future, which has changed. So I think it's the mid-2020s in this book, and a lot has happened. Basically, of course, there's been a nuclear war, and so everybody's hiding underground because above ground is radioactive. But of course, not really, because in fact, people have been hiding. People have been hiding under the after the war was 15 years ago, and people are hiding underneath from the radioactivity. But in fact, the war is not going on, and the people underground are being lied to by the people on the surface, if you will, the ruling class who are on the surface, sort of lying to people below, who are creating, and the people below, their primary job is to create the machinery and things like that, particularly leadies, as I believe they're called, which are the robots that they use on the surface to do the labor and stuff. So then it's a very elaborate thing. It's a very elaborate scheme that they lie to the people below. There's a whole bunch of guys who write scripts for the president to speak to the people below. The people below all get periodic messages from Yancey, and the people who write, I forgot the first name of the guy named Yancey. So the writers are called Yancemen, and they write the scripts for the President Yance, who appears to them every now and then, but he's really just a robot who, when given a script, gesticulates and does these things, but he's not a real person. These writers, these Yancemen who write, they have something called a rhetorizer, which is a machine that writes for them. It's kind of like an AI, I guess, or Grammarly or something like that. It reminds me of Grammarly mostly, but it's also not just, diction and things like that, but also it's, concepts and stuff. So basically what the people underneath are being lied to about is that there's just the West Dem versus the Soviets have taken over the world, and they're still at war, and they blow each other up and stuff. And so you're better off safe going down, staying down, because if you go up, you're going to die from radiation poisoning, and nobody wants that. The Yancemen who are on the surface enjoy, they live in, because there's so few people on the surface, they have these enormous estates, are called demesnes. I don't know how to pronounce it. But they're just like these big plantations, and it's just one guy plus all of his leadies. And there are radiation hotspots, but they are few and far between. And as soon as a hotspot thinks to be cooling off, Yancemen move in to try to take it over, and there's a whole legal process for that, or pseudo-legal process. And of course, these Yancemen are basically like 1984. They alter the history. They can even change. They go back and they adjust the records from the past, and they do all that. It's very 1984 that way. 1984, the book, of course. And they alter the history, and sometimes they even there's even a time machine that just the one guy in power, the super guy who has the most power, they try to trap some guy who is trying to claim some land by going back in time and burying some stuff. They can't send people, they can only send objects back in time, so they bury these ancient relics in this guy's land to prevent him from, because the rules are if you find ancient relics you can't build on that land, and they know that by the character of this guy that he's going to cover it up. And then and of course then the classic thing is the cover-up is even worse than the crime itself, so they're planning on taking it from him for that reason. That's part of the process that they use the time machine for. And so they adjust the records of articles in the past to corroborate the existence of these fake artifacts. It's all very complicated. There are a couple main characters in here. There's a guy named Adams, who of course is one of the protagonists. He's kind of a generic, generic Yantzman who is really impressed by this other guy named David Lantano, who's this young man who's really, really dark, and he's dark because of the radiation and stuff. Or so they think. Though it takes them half the book, even though the first thing that crossed my mind when I first saw it was oh, he's a Native American. But of the characters, it takes them half the book to figure that out. I'm going to read you some quotes. "Ye shall know the truth," Adams thought, "and by this thou shalt enslave." When David Lantano and Adams meet, Adams talks to him, and David Lantano just sees right through Adams, and he's like, how's this guy so smart? And doesn't understand how he's so smart. But I'm going to read you a quote. David Lantano writes this speech that really impresses everybody. What's interesting about Philip K. Dick is he's like, oh, it's the greatest speech ever. And Philip K. Dick has the audacity to actually write out the script. So here it is. "My fellow Americans," the Talbot Yancey simulacrum had said, gravely in its stern, stoic military leadership father voice. Adams would never forget this moment of the speech. "There is a certain ancient Christian idea which you may know, that life on earth, or in your instance, beneath earth, is a transition. An episode between a life that came before and an eternal other kind of life to follow. Once a pagan king in the British Isles was converted to Christianity by the image of his life being the short flight of a nocturnal bird which has flown in through one window of a warm and lighted dining hall of a castle, for a moment passed above a sense of motion and talk, of tangible fellow life, the comfort of being within a place inhabited by others. And then the bird in its flight has gone on out of the lighted dining hall, out of the castle once more, through a second window, into the empty, black, unending night of the far side. And it will never see that lit-up, warm hall of murmur and motion and fellow life again, and hear the Yancey in all its pomp and dignity, the authority of its words that reach so many, many human beings in so many anywhere in the world tanks, had said, you, my fellow Americans in subsurface shelters, you have not even this moment to cling to remember or anticipate to enjoy this short flight through the lighted hall. Brief as it is, you are entitled to it, and yet, because of a terrible madness 15 years ago, a hell night, you are doomed. You are paying every day for the insanity that drove you from the surface, exactly as the whips of the Furies drove our two grandparents from the original gardens eons ago. And this is not right. Somehow, one day, I assure you, the alienation will end, the abridgment of your reality, the deprivation of your rightful life, with the swiftness said to accompany the last trump's full sound. This terrible calamity, this inequity will be abolished. When it comes, it will not be gradual. It will hurl you all, expel you, even if you resist it, back to your own land that is waiting for you above, awaiting your claim. My fellow Americans, your claim is staked, and we guard it. We are the securing agents only for the present. But everything up here will disappear, and you will come back. And even the memory, even the idea of us, who are up here now, will forever vanish. And the Yancey simulacrum had finished. And you will not be able to curse us, because you will not even recall that we existed. So, all of David Lantano's fellow Yancemen were impressed with this guy's speeches, because he told them the truth in such a way that would keep them underground. And it was very, very interesting. And people were he was raising eyebrows, and everyone was impressed with him, how different he was. There's just a little bit about some other stuff, and then there's this quote, which I thought was kind of good unto itself. No wonder they all trembled. No wonder their nights were bad. They served, and knew it, a bad master. So one of the things these guys, these propagandists do is they refer to the war, not just the nuclear war that happened in the 80s or 90s or early noughties, whatever it is, but they also retell the story of World War II, both to the American side, the West Dems, and then the Soviet side. They sort of, both of them, there are these classic propaganda films that are that sort of frame things differently and even throw in a couple lies to completely change it. So they tell two different lies about how World War ended. The original propaganda film, the first one, it shows the U.S. and the U.K. selling out innocent Germans, innocent Germany, to the USSR. Germany was just a pawn in the evil West Dems' attempt to take over the Soviet Union, or is it the other way around? Either way, it's very twisted, and but it's easy to do. They just showed, they would just, because of the power of film, they would just show some clips of British warships, and then they just show starving Germans because of the blockade. That says, oh, how evil the Germans were, how evil the British were because they blockaded the Germans and they starved. End of story. But then to make it, just to push it over the end, they create these, there's two known to the Ants Men fakes in each of the propaganda films. So in one, there's a fake there's a fake conversation between Churchill and Stalin, which never happened. And then there's a version B where the USSR and Japan saved the world from the evil allies, including the Germans, who are now the evil allies instead of, it's crazy. And that video has a fake FDR and Hitler chat where they scheme. So both of these chats are the lies that show how they schemed and lied and everything. And those propaganda films were very great successful, and they convinced everybody underground that they need to stay underground and all that kind of stuff, and that there's just two halves of war. Which by the war ended a long time ago, and you're still underground, but you don't know that. But it all worked. So propaganda, even though there were flaws in the propaganda, it still worked because that's the magic of propaganda. A lot happens. This David Lantanos turns out to be a very charismatic, interesting character and seems to be key. And everything I told you before sort of comes together through him in a way that I'm not going to tell you because I don't tell the endings. But I'm just going to give you one last thing. At one point, one of our characters goes all the way to Moscow to tap the other side because Moscow is a further place to use the computers for the evil guy who's running everything. And so this guy thinks if I check the computers here, I'll have a better chance of finding the truth. And that computer, the big Soviet BB-7. Now, it's just a coincidence that the computer is BB-7? I don't know. Anyway, it's a Philip K. Dick book, so there's a lot implied and a lot not actually explained. Most, as always, there's like a mystery to solve, because that's kind of, the Pulp Fiction kind of thing. He does that well, and it's fun. It's not his best book, but it's not his worst. I'm enjoying it. You should too. If you can't do, review.